Hello everyone and welcome back. It is Jessa and I am so excited you are here today. Tonight I have planned a little bedtime reading for us, a complicated bedtime reading of course. We are going to be reading V for Vendetta, a graphic novel that I have been meaning to read for so long. This is by Alan Moore and it's illustrated by David Lloyd. This book, I think, is the perfect book to help us consider the wild time that we are in right now, where we have the rise of fascist movements in a lot of previously democratic strongholds. We have media that is pushing conspiracy theories. We have the rise of alternate realities and mythologies that are replacing our true understanding or our understanding of what is true and what is false. This is a book that shows us very clearly in fictional terms what a world in which fascism is taking over actually looks and feels like. And while it is hyperbolized, more violent, obviously more fantastical representation of what that looks like, it still for me rings really, really true. Currently, when you look past what you're being marketed, when you look past what you're seeing right in your face and you kind of look to the margins of life, I think you see a great deal of this, a great deal of what is in this text. So we're going to go through it, but we're also going to look at it kind of like it's the sun in a great solar system of texts, because this book, believe it or not, is full of allusions. It's very intertextual, meaning it engages a lot of quotes, a lot of allusions to other texts that are responsible for the world that it depicts. Okay? So the first book that we will think about in addition to this one is, of course, Macbeth. How could we not? You'll notice, my British people, my British viewers, we recognize this mask, right? The Guy Fawkes mask, right? This is a representation of the Guy Fawkes mask. And those of you who are not British viewers, like me, I'm not British, I'm American. We don't know about Guy Fawkes Day really over here. We don't think about it ever. But Guy Fawkes Day is celebrated for a plot against King James that was thwarted in the early 1600s. So King James came to power in 1603 following Queen Elizabeth's death. So it ended the Elizabethan era and brought a rise to the Jacobean era. And the Catholics organized essentially a terrorist attack, an attempt to overthrow, to murder King James by blowing up Parliament and to install a Catholic king in his place. Now, the plot was thwarted, Guy Fawkes was caught with the dynamite, and the king was saved. And he looked a lot like this. This mask is a representation of his kind of face, which is a very, very specific face that Guy Fawkes had. And so this mask is worn to represent him. The attack was thwarted. That's important to note. It didn't happen. But in the first scenes of V for Vendetta, as you'll see, V, this figure, actually does successfully blow up Parliament. And so it's almost as if this character from the past comes back and does the thing that he could not do then. He resurrects the past in the present, but in a new form. So keep that in mind. But the reason Macbeth is so important to that is that Macbeth, written by Shakespeare, was written right after King James came to power. And King James was Shakespeare's patron. So essentially, Shakespeare was being paid by King James to write this play about a Scottish king. And he writes this story about Macbeth, who is told by three witches that he is fated to be king. And so Macbeth, believing that fate is on his side, is emboldened to commit terrible acts, right? Because he thinks that these acts are worthy because they are fulfilling a truthful prophecy, right? So the belief in fate allows him to commit any act in order to make that fate come to fruition, right? So it's as if by saying this is fated, you are given an excuse to do whatever terrible thing you need to do to make it happen. Historically, you can think about it as manifest destiny. Settlers it is manifest by God that you must make it across the coast of the United States and take over everything. In fascism, the belief in one's own superiority and destiny to become the greatest of all becomes an excuse for the annihilation of those who are different, right? That is an essential component. So in Macbeth, these fates tell Macbeth, it is your fate. One moment, my kitty is very excited. We're talking about something quite serious, and there's a kitty over there playing with things. But anyway, Macbeth is told, this is your fate, and therefore he does whatever he can to make it happen, and he murders King Duncan. Now, of course, this starts a sequence of events. He is overwhelmed by guilt, and eventually his hubris destroys him, and he is murdered again, in vengeance, in revenge, after he commits a bunch more murders. Basically, it's a very bloody play. So Shakespeare wrote this, we can assume, to dissuade people from trying to overthrow governments, because he said, if you overthrow the king, ultimately nothing good will come of it. So we'll look at Macbeth because it's quoted so heavily in V for Vendetta. And that's kind of the first text in this solar system that we're going to be looking at. V for Vendetta is a sun, and this is Mercury, okay? We're also going to consider, because V for Vendetta brings up so many fascist concepts, one being the patriarchal nature of a single fascist leader, we're also going to consider Rousseau's two texts, The Origins of Inequality, and also The Social Contract, when we read. So this is another book that will come into our little solar system. And of course, if we're to discuss fascism, we have to discuss How Fascism Works, an amazing book that really breaks down fascism in a legible way by Jason Stanley, who will help us understand the mechanisms of fascism that Alan Moore is depicting with V for Vendetta. And finally, my favorite of all of them, Doppelganger by Naomi Klein, which talks about, as you can see, a trip into the mirror world. It talks about how in our current world we're kind of looking into a mirror that is depicting back to us a loopy, strange, avant-garde, surrealist, uncanny, vaudeville, grotesquely comical, whatever word you want to say, image of ourselves. Essentially, we're looking in funhouse mirrors. And the issue is with doppelgangers is when you have how do I describe this? So we're looking in a funhouse mirror and we're seeing a reflection that is certainly not us. It has attributes of us, but it's zany and strange and manipulated. And so as we look at that, there comes a question of which reflection, which you is the real you? Is it the reflection in the strange mirror, or is it you looking into the mirror? Now, unfortunately, the only one you can really see is the reflected one. So in the case of doppelgangers, it is so often that the intruder, the strange reflection, is the one that takes over and wins. Okay, so this book is going to show us how in our media, in our world, in our political world, in our lives, conspiracy theories, strange narratives, terms that we used to use that are now coming with these strange manipulated definitions that are being, taken out of their context and used and applied to situations that don't actually apply, the idea of truth, all of this, right, can come down to this mere reality that in our world we are surrounded by funhouse mirrors, essentially. And we are looking in those funhouse mirrors, and we are allowing the false reflection in a twisted mirror to become the truth, while we ourselves disappear into a strange living unreality. And that's a strange concept, but it's not so strange, because I'll describe Hannah Arendt, what Hannah Arendt says, and this will be the quote that starts us off to discuss the book. Hannah Arendt says this of truth and of this zany nature of the perverted version of ourselves taking over the truthful thing. Here it is. Mysteriousness as such became the first criterion for the choice of topics. The effectiveness of this kind of propaganda demonstrates one of the chief characteristics of modern masses. They do not believe in anything visible in the reality of their own experience. They do not trust their eyes and ears, but only their imaginations, which may be caught by anything that is at once universal and consistent in itself. What convinces masses are not facts, and not even invented facts, but only the consistency of the system of which they are presumably a part. Repetition is only important because it convinces them of consistency in time. So this is a fascinating key, I think, to V for Vendetta, and that's why I've read it. Now, the first thing, of course, is mysteriousness, and in this case, mysteriousness is, for us, conspiracy theories, which are kind of mysterious. They don't make a whole lot of sense, not grounded in any reality. They're totally deranged in a lot of cases, but as Naomi Klein will say in her text, conspiracy theories are really just funhouse mirror reflections of truth, which makes them just somewhat believable because they have that little kernel of the initial form in them, and yet they become manipulated and grotesque through intentional falsity. They're made false in order to collect an in-group and malign an out-group. That's how conspiracy theories work. Conspiracy theories are developed to cast doubt on an out-group while creating a sense of consistency and belonging and unity in an in-group. Okay, so that's how they work. So mysteriousness in this quote refers to that. And she says it's effective because we do not trust the reality of our own experience. We don't. We can experience something and someone tells us that we didn't, and oftentimes we'll believe the one who says we didn't, even if we know in our hearts that it's not true. And that's the thing that's scary to me. But that's what I mean by we can look in the funhouse mirror and believe that the image in the mirror is true and the reality of our body is not. Right? Who we are, we begin to believe is not true, and we begin to believe the narrative that is given to us. And that is when you know you're in a frightening place. They do not believe in anything visible, in the reality of their own experience. So many people are completely incapable of looking at their lives and saying, what is this? They're so incapable of thinking for themselves, right? They're given a narrative, and they just take it as fact because it's there. But not only is it there, it is, number one, it is consistent, and it comes oftentimes in the same consistent voice, right? We get our information so often from the same people, and because it's coming from the same people and it's repeated over and over and over again, we begin to believe fundamentally that it is true, right? It convinces them, as she says, in the consistency of time. And so we will see, this will take us now to V for Vendetta, where the consistent voice who speaks of these conspiracies is named Fate. Think of Fate in Macbeth and you begin to see the narrative forming. Fate is the voice, the consistent voice that parrots a lie that because it is consistent becomes truth. And that fate is that the fact that fate is the voice shows us that the truth of this society is one that gives its license under this concept of fate to commit any terrible act without remorse. It even has justification, right? It is justified in the committing of those terrible acts because it believes in its own superiority being fated, and that fated superiority is repeated so often by the same voice that its consistency has made it an unassailable truth. Okay, so before we begin, let me repeat that again. We learn from Hannah Arendt, famous philosopher, that the power of conspiracy is that it creates consistency. It comes from a single voice, and from that consistency, the masses, the people, begin to accept it as truth, even when their own lived experience denies that truth. And they begin to act on that truth. Why? Because that truth comes in the same voice, and the truth of their lived experience is not consistent. Our lived experience is inconsistent, it's messy, it's chaotic, it makes no sense. We are all begging for a voice to come to us and make something consistent and trustworthy out of it. Now, the danger is that no voice can speak for you of your own experience. No voice, no one can come and make a linear narrative of your life. Only you can. And the danger is so many of us turn now to other people to make narratives of their lives. And that is the scary thing about fascism, right? So we have this narrative of truth that becomes the consistent reality, the narrative of fate in this text that becomes the consistent reality. The voice that speaks to the people is always the same actor, and it says the same things. It speaks for the state. And that fate is the concept of fate is that the society deserves to be the greatest, the only society, the superior society. And so in order to make that fate real, just as Macbeth does, they're able to commit massive atrocities. They are able to act immoral under the code of righteousness given to them by the false yet consistent drone of the voice of fate. Okay? So that there is what you should look at when we read the first section of V for Vendetta, which we will now begin. I'll see you on the other side. V for Vendetta. I have not yet read this book in its entirety, so keep that in mind. We're definitely going to be floundering through it together. I want to begin with a guiding political principle from Rousseau. Rousseau paraphrasing Grotius. Grotius is a thinker, a legal thinker, who helped transition the concept of private property and property rights to the right of people. So people have personal rights, not just to property, but to themselves. And this led to thinking about government not led by force and warfare, but rather by a set of laws by which everyone agrees, to which everyone agrees. And so that brings us to Rousseau's Social Contract. And this is a book that Rousseau wrote detailing the agreement that allows societies to function. Now, this is important to begin a book about vigilante justice because we can think that vigilante justice is essentially the breaking of that social contract. But the nature of vigilantism implies that that contract has already been broken. When we see vigilante justice, it means that the justice system has failed to protect someone in that social contract, and that person now must take it upon themselves to protect themselves. And so V for Vendetta represents a world in which we believe that the social contract remains, right? We think that the laws are there, but the laws are actually illusions, and it is in fact the ruling class that is ruling by force, disguised as one ruling by law. And so when we look at, the reason I really came to this book is when we look at the issue of vigilante justice, particularly in the case of the United Healthcare CEO, the reason that so many Americans applauded this act rather than feeling sympathy for the murdered is because there is the feeling that the social contract has been broken, that certain people are ruling over us with a bureaucratic force that we have no legal capability to fight against. There are no avenues for us because that system does not belong to this social contract. It's almost as people are waking up to the fact that this social contract in our country has been broken in some fundamental way. The right to your personhood has been broken because we are in a neoliberal world in which only the wealthy have a right to personhood. The poor do not have a right to personhood in the same way that the wealthy do. And the healthcare system really develops or represents that because those who are poor do not receive healthcare oftentimes in this country. And so their lives are of lower value. The social contract is broken. So, in 142, Rousseau quotes Grotius, or paraphrases him rather. Okay? I won't talk about the patriarchal nature of societies first, but Grotius denies that all human power is established for the benefit of the governed, citing slavery as an example. His usual method of reasoning is always to present fact as a proof of right. A more logical method could be used, but not one more favorable to tyrants. Okay, so he's saying here that this concept of the benevolent authoritarian leader is absurd. That power is never established for the benefit of the governed. According to Grotius, it is therefore doubtful whether the human race belongs to 100 men or whether these 100 men belong to the human race. And this is the quote that I want you to think about as we read this book. Does the human race belong to 100 men or the 100 men belong to the human race? This is an interesting switch up grammatically. In poetry, we would call it chiasmus, but you have a cross, right? You list category A, category B, and then you switch them. You go category B, category A. So what he's asking here is, do we all belong like property to a few? Or does that few belong to us like property? Do the wealthy belong to us? Do the governors belong to us? Or do the governors own us? Which is it? So that is the essential question. He says that in Grotius's book, he appears to lean towards the former view, which is the human race belongs to 100 men, that a few select people have all the control over all of us. And throughout this book, he appears to lean towards the former view. This is Hobbes' position as well. On his telling, the human race is divided into herds of cattle, each one having its own leader who guards it in order to devour it. So here we are seeing the concept of tyranny, the concept of fascism. Do we recognize it? How many times have we heard leaders say, "I am protecting you. Only I can protect you"? If you ever hear a leader say this, think of this quote from Rousseau. The human race is divided into herds of cattle, each one having its own leader who guards it in order to devour it. What is the difference between the word guard and protect? Guard implies ownership. It implies that someone will come to steal what you have. Now, protection implies a sort of love that derives from this kind of prototype of the father, right? Fascism uses the prototype of the father to create a sort of loyalty to a leader, disguised as one of love, disguised as one of love for a unified people. What is actually happening, however, is that power is the true thing that is guiding this leader. And he is guarding the people in order to siphon resources from them, in order to reduce their humanity with the sole purpose of increasing his own. And so this line lays bare the fear behind that word. The statement, I am protecting you, is really saying, I am guarding you in order to make use of you for my own purposes. And I do not care about you. I do not believe in the social contract that you still think exists. So in the case of vigilante justice, right, that happens. It is a symptom of the breaking of a social contract. When the society begins to realize that the laws do not apply to everyone equally. Okay? It is when the human race wakes up and realizes that the leader is breaking the laws and not receiving any justice for those breaking. Now, the leader will attempt to maintain that social contract remains in place, because they do not want the people to begin to take justice in their own hands, right? They are guarding themselves, right, from the consequences of their own dehumanizing actions. So as this patriarchal leader kind of takes apart these laws that we agreed upon, fundamentally changes them so they serve the main leader, saying, I am allowed to do this because I wish to protect you, and only I can protect you from the perceived threats, these imagined mythical threats that don't actually exist, but because, again, this is a fascist world, we're no longer seeing reality clearly. We're believing in these threats that exist that allow the leader to annihilate the social contract. Vigilante justice arrives when the social contract is broken. And the narrative from the ruling class will always be, you can't murder. You can't commit crimes. There are better ways to do this. They will say this directly as they are murdering people. Now, that murder might be bureaucratic, but it is still murder. And bureaucratic murders by their nature happen in large numbers. Okay? Vigilante justice is so often targeted and results in the death of one. We've spoken about this before, but humanity has a trouble understanding death when it is in large numbers. It's like we can't perceive it. When it is one, we think it is a horrific crime. And so that is why we struggle to see the assassination of a CEO in the street clearly. We see it as a terrible, terrible crime. And yet we do not see all of those who have died due to bureaucratic systems of efficiency with the intention of making as much money as possible. We don't see them as victims because their deaths were not in front of our faces and they were in large numbers. They are the deaths of strangers. They do not have faces, and there are so many of them that our brain ceases to see them as individuals. Okay? So vigilante justice by its nature is oftentimes, usually, the death of a select few powerful people. And the ruling classes will tell the people that such a vigilante acts are morally wrong, even though the concept of morality is no longer an agreement, but applies only to situations that maintain the powerful concept of protection that allows a leader to devour its own people. Okay, so that's a bunch of stuff that I've said. there with Rousseau. I'm not sure if any of that made sense, but I also have one more here. This quote is one that I came to myself, which is, "Reality is fleeting, but the fictions we write about it are not." So I'm going to write that down really quickly. I have a cold, so I have to cough a lot. Find my post-it note. Didn't I have one? Oh, I know where it is. Reality is fleeting, but the fictions we write about it are not. Okay, so just think about that again, because we're going to see the concept of unreality becoming reality again because of its consistent, and reality is unfortunately inconsistent and easily forgotten. Okay? So that's one that we want to think about. So let's begin the book. We've already read the introduction, so let's skip right over. Book 1, Europe After the Rain. The book begins initially with this concept of protection and its manipulation, as you can see here. For your protection. We are surveilling you for your protection. Anytime you see your, replace it with my protection or our protection, and know that you do not belong to the our in the case of a fascist regime. Okay. It begins with the voice of fate. Good evening, London. It's 9 o'clock, and this is the voice of fate broadcasting on 275 and 285 in the medium wave. It is the 5th of the 11th, 1997. The weather will be fine until 12:07 a.m. when a shower will commence, lasting until 1:30 a.m. for your protection. For your protection. The temperature will vary between 13 and 14 degrees centigrade throughout the night. And you can see in the image here, I don't know how well you can see, let me bring it down a little bit. There. Masses listening to the voice of fate, right? As they are watched by cameras that exist for their own protection. Now we are introduced to a girl here who is putting on makeup. And her room is very girly. You see she has a little stuffed animal here. She's putting on her makeup in the mirror. But she looks terrified. You see that? She is one of the ones that allegedly is to be protected. Now we hear this good news follows similar announcements concerning the increased production of both eggs and potatoes. Now, this is so funny to me because what was our election in the United States about? Comically, the price of eggs, right? How the small, absurd details become excuses to let in someone under the guise of protection who will devour us. Dangling these small things in front of our faces, a bit like dogs running after little treats when behind them is a whole cake. So, yeah, the eggs, these little details are so accurate to our current moment that it's kind of eerie. So there's this young girl who's terribly afraid. Police raided 17 homes in the Birmingham area earlier this morning, uncovering what is believed to be a major terrorist ring. 20 people, 8 of them women, are currently in detention awaiting trial. The interesting thing that they defined women is really fascinating. In fascist political worlds, gender becomes very, very defined. And so you'll see a lot of anti-homosexuality in fascist governments. But you also see that men are meant to join the military. The men are for the military, women are for motherhood. So you see an increased focus on women as mothers. Hence the anti-abortion impulse in the United States, which is to say that women, no matter how they come to motherhood, must bear the child. That is their sole purpose in our world. So this is a young girl, of course. And she's putting on makeup because she is poor. And the only recourse she has in the society is to essentially walk the streets, to spend time with men for money. And so we see here that she is getting ready to go out, as we have this voice of fate speaking these lies in the background. Speaking of Queen Zara today, appearing at the opening of a new waste reclamation plant in Plaistow. We're thinking about, oh, industry, look at all of the great business we are creating. While in the margins, there is a girl who cannot support herself and must go to these kind of alternate methods of making money. The queen was wearing a suit of peach silk created specially for the occasion by the royal courtier. And you see here the lionization of typical female traits. In a speech today, Mr. Adrian Carroll, Party Minister for Industry, stated that Britain's industrial prospects are brighter than at any time since the last war. The revival of industry, of course, we see that. Mr. Carroll went on to say that it is the duty of every man in this country to seize the initiative and make Britain great again. Oh my God. Do I need to? How can we look? Can it be any more obvious? You know, that the United States is descending into this kind of fascist reality that he is depicting here. You have the eggs, you have the sexualization of women, right? This odd dichotomy between women being sexualized objects that you can assault and at the same time being things that you need to protect and you need to be good mothers for their society. It's a fascinating dichotomy that fascism creates. It turns women again into sexualized objects that have no rights over their own bodies, as she does here. And it also turns women into these mules that must birth children for their country to make America great again. It is so eerie how on point this text is. And if you look here, this is when it was published. It was published in 1989, was it? I mean, there are a lot of different numbers. It was clearly beginning to be written in 1989 or coming out in 1989. How did he know, right? How much America would look like this in 2024? It's actually like legitimately terrifying. We have this masked man out in the streets shooting CEOs, right? Well, we have this whole narrative going out in the background, okay? And that is the face of London tonight. We remind you that tomorrow is the final date for the completion of your census forms. So, of course, determining who is in our country. We are a country of surveillance, correct? We surveil you so that we can devour you. And it's so fascinating here, and this is why I love comic books, that as it says the face of London, what picture is shown? Her. She is the face of London. They can say all of these lies. They can tell us about Queen Zara. They can give us a speech about industry. They can tell us that we all have an initiative to make Britain great again. But the real face is the young girl who is forced to sell herself on the streets because of a limited world which turns her into an object, the property of the state, and therefore she loses all of her humanity. Chapter 1, the villain. The question becomes, of course, we see V here, the perceived villain, the one who commits the crime, who blows up Parliament. But is he the true villain? Is it the woman who sells herself on the street, or is it the man who catches her and says that she is committing a crime? Is it the man who prosecutes, or is it the woman who commits the crime? Who is the villain? We have to, of course, consider what the definition of the crime is and how the crime is functioning in relationship to the state's fascist power. Okay, so we see here the man lights a cigarette. He is a cop, and under Parliament's cold shadow falls on Westminster Bridge, and she shivers. There was power here once, power that decided the destiny of millions. Fate was once in the hands of the people, and now fate is where? Here, right? So it's changed. Her transactions, her decisions are insignificant. They affect no one except her. I don't rightly know what this means, so if you do, write it in the comments, because I don't understand what this is saying. I thought I did, but I don't think I actually do. But I do think the fact that morality and justice and things like that are gendered female is important. And so she attempts to solicit this man, but he, of course, is a cop. And so he says, "You have picked a vice detail on a stakeout." Okay. And she's surrounded by his colleagues, and they say, "You know the laws on prostitution. That's a Class H offense. That means we get to decide what happens to you. That's our prerogative." And beside this, right, beside "please don't kill me," all of this, the juxtaposed image is strength through purity, purity through faith. All of these are fascist terms. We'll go to how fascism works. The most important term here is purity and faith. And of course, strength. Strength is idolized above all things, and liberalism, or the liberal ideology of the power of the people, of plurality, of debate, appears weak, right? Strength is in quick decisions, it's in efficiency, it is in the trial and conviction in the moment, right? Not drawn out. Okay. This goes back to, of course, the patriarchal father, that is the authoritarian reader. The patriarchal father's authority derives from his strength, and strength is the chief authoritarian value. By representing the nation's past as one with a patriarchal family structure, fascist politics connects nostalgia to a central organizing hierarchical authoritarian structure, one that finds its purest representation in these norms. Okay? The patriarchal family is always represented as a central part of the nation's traditions, diminished even recently by the advent of liberalism and cosmopolitanism. But why is patriarchy so strategically central to fascist politics? It is the concept of strength and the subordination of women in particular. Okay? For a man, military service or strength is the most profound and valuable form of participation, but for the woman, it is motherhood. Fascism will separate women into two categories, that of the mother and that of the dehumanized victim, the woman who is of use to men sexually. And so we see that currently in our leaders, the overwhelming amount of sexual assaults that our leaders in America have committed perceive women as objects, and yet at the same time they idolize them. So they contain in themselves a strange duality in that they idolize and, quote, protect women. But if you can protect them, right, that implies a kind of ownership. It might be a product that you like and you don't want anyone to steal, but it's still a product. And so they can use women who they feel are not deserving of their protection, right? However they wish. They become products or property of men when you say, a woman is to be protected. That's a great kind of definition here, speaking about Mitt Romney. And so Gendered language and references to women's roles and special value often slip into political speech without much thought to their implication. In the 2016 U.S. election, a video surfaced showing Republican presidential nominee Donald Trump making harshly demeaning comments about women. Mitt Romney, the Republican Party's 2012 presidential nominee, said that Trump's remarks demean our wives and daughters. Paul Ryan, the Republican Speaker of the House, said, "Women are to be championed and revered, not objectified." Both of these remarks reveal an underlying patriarchal policy or ideology that is typical of much of U.S. Republican Party policy. They demean half of our fellow citizens. That's a reality. But rather than saying that, they say, oh, no, women should be risen up, right? Exclusively speaking in terms of traditionally subordinate roles in families. He says, of course, wives and daughters, not sisters, not co-workers, wives and daughters, both who are patriarchally subordinate roles. That the wives and daughters of our society should be risen up. Who is left behind? Those women who are co-workers should not. Those women, they are up for grabs. Those women who are in positions of precarity are not worthy of that protection. So it's a fascinating way that works, that when you are idolized or considered a beautiful thing worthy of protection, you are in fact being a subordinate thing. You are becoming property of someone else. You protect yourself, ladies. Don't ever forget that. You protect yourself. Do not give that power to anyone. Especially not the state. Okay. The next, of course, is purity. And purity also has to do with women because women are child bearers, right? And so they create the pure race. But this mythic patriarchal past relies upon, let me find it. It relies upon a kind of memory of a purity of a past that, of course, never existed. But the whole point is that it's a made-up past. So here they say, the clear message is that patriarchy is a virtuous past practice whose protection from liberalism must be enshrined in the fundamental law of the country. Essentially, women who are empowered, who choose their partners, who choose whether or not to have children, are a danger to the purity of the country itself. They become impure by denying their essential role in a patriarchal society. In fascist politics, myths of a patriarchal past, threatened by encroaching liberal ideas and all they entail, function to create a sense of panic at the loss of hierarchical status, both for men and for the dominant group's ability to protect its purity and status from foreign encroachment. Purity is so tied to status, of course. And of course, the leader may be as unpure as he wishes. It doesn't matter because he's created a lie of purity that exists in the past that he must now resurrect here through the annihilation of those who are impure. This woman being a perfect example. And she's not a woman, she's a girl, right? She's a child, but her childhood has been stripped from her. And finally, faith. So let's listen to fascism's central figure, Mussolini. Of faith, he says, and of myth, he says, believing faith is believing in that which you cannot see. Correct? That of which you have no proof. So in a fascist world, faith is essential. We have created our myth. The myth is a faith, a passion. It is not necessary for it to be a reality. Our myth is the nation. Our myth is the greatest of the nation. And to this myth, this greatness, which we want to translate into a total reality, we subordinate everything. Now, a passion, right? You're going to see, and I'll flip ahead to this concept of passion. That the myth described in this text as fate, right? The voice of fate. The fate is that this world shall be the greatest, is sexualized. So let me show you how it is sexualized. Oh my gosh, so much happens in this book. I'm just looking. Is it here? Right, yeah, let's turn here. We're going to skip here now, and then we'll go back and fill in the blanks before when V for Vendetta happens. But here they talk about the myth is a passion, a kind of sexual passion, right? Or a love-bound passion. So here we go. This is our leader here. My name is Adam Susan. I am the leader of the lost, ruler of the ruins. I am a man like any other man. No, you're not. I lead the country that I love, right? That patriarchal love, passion. Out of the wilderness of the 20th century, I believe in survival, in the destiny of the Nordic race. I believe in fascism. Oh yes, I am a fashion. What of it? Fascism, a word whose meaning has been lost in the bleatings of the weak and the treacherous. Boom. Brilliant statement. This book blows my mind. This book just blows my mind regularly. I'm just like, what is this book? This is brilliant, because how many times have you heard Trump called a fascist? How many times? And does it matter? No. No one cares, right? How many times you hear people or leaders called fascists and they don't care because it's just a word, and most people don't even know what the word means. And so I'm hoping that this video helps you understand, if you didn't know what fascism was, understand what fascism is a little bit better. But I lead the country that I love, that patriarchal love, which is disguised. Love is merely power in disguise, right? I believe in the destiny of the Nordic race, just like Macbeth, poor bloody Macbeth, believed in his own destiny. And when he says Nordic race is again, a stand-in for him. It's not the Nordic race he believes in. He believes in his own personal, powerful destiny, right? It's all a ruse. Nordic race is him, the world in his image. Love is not love, but power. Survival is this kind of reduction to a fear-based world in which there is us versus them. So life is not about art, it is not about love, it is not about learning, it is not about striving, it is about a struggle, a reductive struggle between us and them. And we do it because, and we can do whatever we want in that struggle, in that animalistic struggle, because we have fate and destiny on our side. So we continue, because who is the myth? She is a lady. But let's stop here with a word, and go to doppelgangers. I know I'm switching between texts like a crazed person. But he says here that a word means nothing because the weak and the treacherous use it. Who are the weak and the treacherous? Of course, the people who do not agree. 150 to 151 in doppelgangers. 150. There we go. So she says here of words, the conspiracy and the use of words by those who will throw them around and use them as ridiculous contexts kind of destroy the word. So here it is. I was writing an article about how hard-right local politicians in Northern California had ordered police to evict survivors of the state's deadliest wildfire from the tents where some were living in public parks. I typed a sentence about it being an ominous portent of an eco-fascist future in which ecological fears are harnessed to rationalize violent security crackdowns against those deemed lesser humans, often immigrants and the poor. So most people probably don't know that this happened, right? That after a wildfire, those who lost their homes were living in public parks and tents, and Republicans wanted them rejected from those tents. People probably don't know that. She says ecofascism is a real threat, and it is becoming more explicit on the parts of the right. But I deleted the term in favor of eco-authoritarianism, a bit weaker. Why? Because fascism has become absurd to say. Right? It has lost its meaning because those who are fascist are using it to describe things that are not fascist, knowing that no one actually knows what the term really means. Okay? By throwing the term fascism around is what other Naomi does, and hasn't she helped make the very word absurd, right? By using it so much, it becomes absurd. So what do you do when you actually do see fascism? Then I realized what I had done. Ecofascism is the accurate term to describe the threat. How convenient it is for coalescing fascist forces if the term has been so abused that anti-fascists are loath to use it to accurately describe events in the real world. Okay, so the term has been abused and used to such an extent, right, that it no longer works. It's as if words are manipulated, overused by the people who are actually doing the fascist things. They use it, they make it absurd, they steal the term, and they destroy it. So when you speak of fascism, people will automatically think that you are crazy. They'll think you're crazy, even if all of the evidence points to fascism, right? They'll think you're crazy because so many crazy people have used the term, and they have used it to apply to situations that aren't fascist, and they've used it particularly in relationship to conspiracy theories. And conspiracy theories exist to denigrate the truth, to make us question everything, right? The consistent appearance of fascism has made the word fascist pretty useless, right? For instance, the concept that COVID lockdowns are turning Australia into a fascist state is one of those kinds of conspiracy theories that's floating around. And that denigrates, that kind of cooks a little crack in fascism's hard exterior. Okay, so when he says this, right, that all of those people using fascism wrong, right, calling me a fascist, they're saying that fascism is bad. They're using the word incorrectly, right? It has been lost, right? He's saying the meaning of fascism is good, strong, blah, blah, blah. But all of those people who would say what fascism is, in truth, they are destroying the word. Okay, so it's interesting how words have lives and they have deaths. Sorry, there's a truck going by. But to think now of passion and this kind of sensuality applied to concepts, particularly political concepts, with the gendering of females, female ideas. He goes on to say the Romans invented fascism. I believe in strength. I believe in unity. These are classic fascist principles. Strength, unity of purpose demands a uniformity of thought, word, and deed, then so be it. I will not hear talk of freedom. I will not hear talk of individual liberty. They are luxuries. I do not believe in luxuries. The war put an end. War put paid to luxury. The war put paid to freedom. And yes, freedom is so often a luxury that we willingly give up, because it's not really a luxury. In a lot of ways, it's very, very hard. Okay. Here we go. He comes down to, shall I speak of her? Shall I speak of my bride? Okay. She has no eyes to flirt or promise, but she sees all, sees and understands with a wisdom that is godlike in its scale. I stand at the gates of her intellect, and I am blinded by the light within. How stupid I must seem to her, how childlike and uncomprehending. Her soul is clean, untainted by the snares and the ambiguities of emotion. She does not hate, she does not yearn, she is untouched by joy or sorrow. I worship her, though I am not worthy. She does not love me. They think she is hard and cold, those who do not know her. They think she is lifeless and without passion. They do not know her. She has not touched them. She touches me, and I am touched by God, by destiny. The whole of existence courses through her. I worship her. I am her slave. So freedom ever was. No freedom ever was. No freedom ever was so sweet. My love, I would stay with you forever, would spend my life within you. I wait upon your every utterance and never ask the merest splinter of affection. Fate, I love you. Romantic partnership in this text, the one that's appropriate, is not between a man and a woman, but between a man and a concept who has been gendered female. Fate. So this is very much about love, the danger of romantic love among the people. The people are not meant to love each other, they are meant to love the state. Why? Because when you love someone, you form with them a bond of equality, you are a partnership, right? When you love someone, you give yourself to them and they give themselves to you. It is an equal partnership. It is not worship. Right? Not like what the quotes we read in the Fascism Works book, where they're talking about women should be revered, women should be protected. That's not equal love. That's not partnership. Right? What he has here is a worshipping of fate, which he has gendered female, to say that the greatest relationship and love a man can have is for an idea. And that idea is the concept of one's own power, right? The destiny of the Nordic race, my own power. The one thing, the true love in this world is not for a woman, but it is for an idea. And we turn her into a woman to show how the natural way of life, the glory of life, the beauty of life, falling in love with a boy or falling in love with a girl, getting married, having children, writing books, reading books, making paintings, going to work, building things, all of that is not as important as the love of the state. Fate is the state. There's no surprise that they rhyme. I love you, the state. So we must look in this book for where we see depictions of love, but not just love. We're looking not just for love, but also depictions of partnership. When we think about that Paul Rand and Mitt Romney quote where we saw you love your wives and your daughters, not your coworkers, right? I think it's a fascinating thing. So we're looking for partnership. I'm sorry, there's a truck outside that's vibrating, but I don't know how much you can hear that. Love for partnership. So that being said, right after that, we see V here come to stand before justice, and he does the same thing, so they're juxtaposed, right? And he speaks in the same way about how justice has left the arms of the people, right? Once he loved her, but she has cheated on him, right? She is now joined arms with this man. So it's showing us that the definition of justice and the definition of what is right has fundamentally shifted, right? It used to belong to the people, that the people had power and representation, and they had power in a legal system designed to help them against those powerful institutions that wished to devour them. It used to be that way. But what we're seeing now is just as this lady has left, she's an unfaithful statue, and she has gone with this man. So the population might be living under the delusion that she is still their mistress. But what they have not realized is that she has left their bed, essentially. So we'll read this section, and then we'll go back to the initial scene with a bit more concept of justice and how it's working in the text to look at it. I've long admired you, albeit only from a distance. I used to stare at you from the streets below when I was a child. I'd say to my father, "Who is that lady?" And he'd say, "That's Madam Justice." And I'd say, "Isn't she pretty?" Please don't think it was merely physical. I know you're not that sort of girl. No, I loved you as a person, as an ideal. Right? strange as a person, as an ideal. That's a kind of contradictory statement. That was a long time ago. I'm afraid there's someone else now. What, V, for shame? You have betrayed me for some harlot, so vain and swears, with painted lips and a knowing smile? Ay, madam, I beg to differ. It was your infidelity that drove me to her arms. Right? So this is the thing he's saying. My criminal acts are because of your abandonment. When justice abandons us, when the equality of the law abandons us, when what is right becomes muddled, that is when criminals rise up, right? When the vigilante comes up, and suddenly who is a criminal and who is not becomes very, very difficult to discern. And that is why we have those reductive definitions that a fascist policy will create, because they know in their hearts that they are committing crimes, right? And they know that justice has been muddled. And so they apply these reductive categories to it. They say, you have a perpetrator and you have a victim. You have a crime, you have the righteous, and you have the criminal. He is the righteous. He believes and acts with a moral justice that he believes to be true. But what happens if the moral itself has changed? It has come not to worship your fellow man, which is what morals should be, to love your fellows. Rather, the moral now is to worship the state. So anyone who does not love the state as they would love a partner or as they would worship a god is therefore in some way in a criminal state. They are in some way amoral. That being said, that surprised you, didn't it? I didn't know about your little fling, but I do. You thought I didn't know about your little fling, but I do. I know everything. Frankly, I wasn't surprised when I found out. You always did have an eye for a man in a uniform. Uniform? Why, I'm sure I didn't know what you were talking about. It was always you, V. You were the only one. Liar! Deny that you let him have his way with you. Him with his armbands and jacket boots. Well, catch caught your tongue? I thought as much. Very well. So you stand revealed at last. You are no longer my justice. You are his justice now. You have bedded another. Sob, choke. Who is she, V? What is her name? Her name is Anarchy, and she has taught me more as a mistress than you ever did. She has taught me that justice is meaningless without freedom. She is honest. She makes no promises and breaks none, unlike you, Jezebel. I used to wonder why you could never look at me in the eye. Now I know. So goodbye, dear lady. I would be saddened by our parting even now, save that you are no longer the woman that I once loved. Here is a final gift. I leave it at your feet. And how beautiful is it that the bomb that destroys Lady Justice is a box of chocolates, right? This emblematic symbol of romantic love and courting. So we see here that V has abandoned justice because justice now thinks only of the state and nothing else. And in abandoning justice, he has now turned to another mistress, which is Anarchy. Okay? So let's go back now and think about that scene in the beginning, which I don't think is in the movie. It's not sexualized in the movie. I think she's just walking around in the movie. She's not soliciting a man. This is an interesting change to make, but here we are. So, this is the reduction, right, that I was talking about, in the reducing of the morally gray to make clear categories between the righteous and the criminal. We've changed the moral code. The moral code is no longer to be good to fellow man, but rather to morality is to support the state. Anything goes as long as it supports the state, right? So in this case, we have turned her life, her very being into a crime. That means that she is no longer a person, she is a criminal, she is dehumanized, and we are allowed to do anything to her that we want. And so he says, you'll do anything we want and then we'll kill you. That's our prerogative, right? Now, however, arrives V before they can kill him. And what does he say? The multiplying villainies of nature do swarm upon him. Who knows what this is from? And fortune on his damned quarrel, smiling, showed like a rebel's whore. But all's too weak for brave Macbeth. Well, he deserves that name. Disdaining fortune with his brandished steel, like valor's minion carved out his passage till he faced the slave, which ne'er shook hands nor bade farewell to him. And then he rescues the girl after stating this monologue or soliloquy. No, not soliloquy, it's actually a messenger who delivers the speech from Macbeth. So let me get my Macbeth. And we'll go to the page. There we go. Here, a sergeant recounts a battle between MacDonald and Macbeth. MacDonald is a treacherous general, I suppose, who has turned against King Duncan and is basically joined the other side. And Macbeth and MacDonald come to this final battle together, and the sergeant is recounting that to King Duncan here. Okay, and so here is what Alan Moore has chosen to include, and it's very obvious why, right? We're seeing that love and fortune being compared to a woman and a woman's love, right? All's too weak for brave Macbeth. So the merciless MacDonald, worthy to be a rebel, for to that the multiplying villainies of nature do swarm upon him, right? Saying that he is a traitor, and all of that is terrible, all that is terrible about life exists on him, right? And so these people are MacDonald, right? These people who have broken a contract, who have turned to treachery, who have supported now someone who would go against the people. Fortune on his damned quarrel smiling. So fortune is sitting on his lapel, essentially, or lapel. Showed like a rebel's whore, but all's too weak. So fortune we can think of as fate, right? Where we have the leader over here, right? I am your leader. That fate is his lover. And so we see here that fate is the lover who goes, because she is a whore, to the one who has the most money, to the one who has the most power. So fate goes to the powerful, okay? But not to Macbeth, because Macbeth is brave, and all of that, the belief in one's own fated superiority, the tendency of those who win being the most powerful, it doesn't matter, because Macbeth disdains that fortune. He disdains that narrative of one's self-aggrandizement. Right? He disdains the idea that you are fated to dominate the world, that you are fated to become the leader. He says, no, that is not true. And with his brandished steel, which smoked with bloody execution, like valor's minion, carved out his passage till he faced the slave. The slave to what? To fortune, to fate, right? So that this desire in the perfection of the state, the superiority of the state, this servitude to power, right? Because fate and power are so similar, because fate goes to the powerful, right? That is a form of enslavement. It is not a freedom. So even the most powerful man in the country is not free in this system. Freedom itself is completely gone. Till he faced the slave, which ne'er shook hands nor bade farewell to him, till he unseamed him from the nave to the chaps, and fixed his head upon our battlements. So he killed this man, who is a slave to power and a slave to his own personal fortune. He killed him, right? So Macbeth, this is what he is kind of referring to. So we can see how this Macbeth section, all of those themes in this one little monologue are present right here in this text. And so he saves this girl, right? V does. Oh, and I forgot to say one more thing. V's are important, of course. Valor. Valor is so important, right? That word, he is valor's minion. So we can think about V for Vendetta is valor's minion. Now in the book, of course, he replaces valor with anarchy, because Alan Moore certainly does like anarchy. I don't like anarchy, but I didn't write the book. We have to say what the book says. So, but valor, right, is the term that has that key V. Okay. So he annihilates them and takes the girl to a place that is a repository, a sort of library of culture, and it is called, if I remember. That bus is very annoying. It is called, let us go to it. I can't remember. Let's find it. The Shadow Gallery. Okay, the Shadow Gallery. All of that which exists inside the shadow that the enormous body of the state casts. Right? That which exists in the shadows that the state wishes to remain in darkness. And that is, of course, culture, art, books, life, joy, happiness, love, ideas. This is what the state does not wish to see, right? Because it questions. Videos like this question the authoritarian power of regimes who use information to convince people of things that aren't true. Something like this that we are looking at, this book would be banned, right? Because it says an ultimate truth about the way that power works. But this would be in the Shadow Gallery that V has. And you'll notice who's there? Shakespeare. Of course, Shakespeare. So, you hear all this music as well, which is important to think because this chapter is all about the voice. The voice of what? Fate. Okay. Fate. And the voice is, well, let's read. What are they saying about the fireworks? Oh, we missed the part. V here blows up Parliament. Boop, blows it up. Okay. So what are you saying about fireworks? And he did it with fireworks, so it's very pretty. Fate doesn't think we should mention the fireworks. If anyone asks later, we'll say it was a freak effect of the blast. Listen to Lewis. Isn't he marvelous? If fate really had a voice, it would sound just like that. If only people knew what a good job he's doing. Don't be stupid, Dascom. The whole idea is that people think it's fate talking. It makes fate appear more human, gives people confidence. He collects dolls, Wouldn't think it, would you? Big man like that, collecting dolls. He's sensitive, you see. You can tell by his voice. So we learn here that the voice of fate, who's essentially the great propaganda machine, right? He collects dolls. And he has a deep, unending passion for these little children. Now, of course, the irony is that in the previous chapter, we had an actual child being almost murdered and assaulted by men, and he cares nothing for her. So we see that adoration for the rights of property over the rights of people. Okay, the dolls, the objects, the consumerist product, he has more love for that than he does an actual person. And that's what neoliberalism and fascism does, is it obscures value. It places value in different places. Okay. Yes, a lot of you media people are sensitive, aren't you? I don't know why the leader tolerates you. Now again, this is the manipulation of sensitive. He's sensitive because he loves dolls. But we would really think that sensitive people love people. So it's again that the misuse or the new definition of words. Now, we go to the Shadowland, or the Shadows Gallery, and we come here, they're on a train, and this is when V kidnaps the voice of fate. Now this is very bad, because if the voice of fate changes, then we lose the consistency that fascist lies depends upon. Suddenly the voice of fate has changed. People will be aware, right, that something is different, that perhaps fate is not what they thought it was. So the consistency is destroyed. But let's keep moving. So he's kidnapped, right? She's here crying because she was frightened that he would leave. And we have a flashback to her family life and how it was destroyed. Her parents were destroyed because, or taken away because they did not properly support the state. Her mother died of a sickness due to an ecological disaster, as you can see here. So eco-fascism even is coming in here that we talked about with Naomi Klein. Maybe I should slow down. I think I'm going through this too fast and it's getting confusing. So basically, he kidnaps the voice of fate here and takes him, and he puts him in a kind of concentration camp, he calls it. He puts him in the Larkhell resettlement camp, which is meant to be a concentration camp. And in fascist regimes, concentration camps are placed to hide atrocious crimes, right? You hide atrocities in these camps that no one can enter, no cameras are allowed in. So if we go to fascism, this has a good example of that, of the concept of the concentration camp, right? Particularly with ICE, which was one of the first, the arrival of ICE was one of the first, I think, portents for the rise of fascism in the United States during Bush's administration. So he writes here, in June 2019, Representative Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez created a furor by describing these private detention camps as concentration camps. But Ocasio-Cortez's description is accurate. Like concentration camps in Germany in the 1930s, they are hidden from public view. Journalists are barred from visiting these centers. They are open only to legal representatives and members of Congress. In early June, the Trump administration canceled educational, recreational, and legal aid for migrant children in detention centers, sealing them off further from public scrutiny. Reports of extreme conditions in these centers have flooded the news. These reports have been provided by legal representatives empowered to visit them. So the use of concentration camps in the United States is not abnormal, nor is it new. And we have this idea of a concentration camp as a kind of a systematic eradication created by Hitler's final solution. But concentration camps take many forms. There was a concentration camp of a kind in, was it Mississippi, Texas? It was called the Devil's Bowl, I believe, which resulted in the death of over 20,000 newly freed enslaved people, or newly freed slaves. African Americans essentially were put into these camps because there was no place to house them following emancipation. And so they built these camps in this kind of bowl, essentially surrounded by bluffs. And they denied them food, They had no resources, and 20,000 died in those camps. And so the US has a significant history of concentration camps. Of course, there is Japanese internment, a little bit different in nature, but still this concept of putting that which is unsightly and that which we fear into camps and segmenting them away from the population. Okay? And so ICE, again, is a representation of that, because it has police-like power directed at political outsiders inside our borders. The institution itself is tied politically to the country's leader. Trump is the first president endorsed by a major union representing ICE employees. But here goes the depiction of ICE. And this is important because in fascist regimes, anti-immigration fervor is one of the primary fallacies or fears that allows a fascist leader to enter into power. ICE is an organization that is like the police but is not the police. The job of the police in a democratic society is to keep communities safe. In practice, ICE collaborates with conventional American criminal justice institutions, including local police departments, but often ends up working at cross purposes with them by creating fear in immigrant communities whose members become less likely to report crime. As a result, some police chiefs have aligned themselves against ICE raids. The goal of ICE is not to make communities safer, right? So this is showing us that ICE is actually making it less likely for people to commit crimes, to report crimes than it is to reduce them. The goal of ICE is not to make communities safer. ICE's mission is to reinforce a distinction between us and them. It is almost as if them requires a separate police force. So that is the kind of silent mechanisms that fascism enacts in the background while we are all looking over here. Okay. So anyway, he puts him in a concentration camp, which is obviously kind of, I do unto you as you did to me, or do unto others as they would do to you, or something like that. Right? Puts him in a concentration camp surrounded by barbed wire. This is where the voice of fate goes. Okay, now we'll move on to, he's in the concentration camp. We'll move now back to our female protagonist here. What is her name? Is it Evie? I can't remember. Let's go back to her name. Where does she say her name? Sorry, I completely forgot what her name was. Let's go to the Shadow Realm. Evie, it is Evie. Okay, I was right. It says here, my name is Evie Hammond. Okay. So here they're talking. She was terrified he wouldn't come back after kidnapping the voice of fate. But here we learn about her history. And we see the ecofascism which Naomi Klein was talking about, which is these environmental disasters open up the opportunity for governments to come in and essentially cleanse the population of the undesirables, the poor, the minorities. Okay, so her mother ended up dying, I believe, of a disease related to the ecological disaster. Her father was then taken by the state because he was against the state, essentially. Dad had been in a socialist group when he was younger. They came for him on September morning in 1993. It was my birthday. I was 12. I never saw him again. They made me go and work in a factory with a lot of other kids. We were putting matches into boxes. I lived in a hostel. It was cold and dirty, and I used to cry all the time. I wanted my dad. And then she goes out in the street to make more money because she could not make anything in the factories. She's forced into that life of crime. And he tells her, he gives her that kind of love, right? That she really, really needed. Okay? A love between people that we have not seen. We've only seen the leader hugging fate, right? This is the only example of love that we see between V, the criminal, and the little girl. Both of these, by the state's definition, are criminals worthy and punishable by death. And here they are, showing the only humanity we have so far seen. Now, here we go. We have the mention of vaudeville. I'm not going to go into that yet because it's such a huge subject. We'll do that in a different video. We'll go now to the punishment he has in store. In the concentration camp, of course, he has lined up all of his dolls. The significance of this, of course, is those that enter a concentration camp cease to be human. And so he kills those non-human things. And it makes this man go insane. Go insane, right? Because he loves his objects more than he loves people. And so this is a twisted world in which the dolls represent those that he has murdered. And he cannot handle the desecration of his objects. But if these were people, he would not care. So it's a fascinating reversal and a concept of punishment for the voice of fate who he captures. These are the children, are they not, that are spoken of with Evie living in the hostel. The representations of that. And he can only be broken by what he has done when he sees the thing he loves destroyed. Because it does destroy him. After, he can say only this: Mama, Mama. So it is interesting that upon his death, upon the death of his objects, he does not say blindly, Father, 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 the voice of the state, but rather Mama, a return to that initial love, the true love between a mother and a child. He is pleading for his humanity after he sees and feels what he has done to so many people as the voice of fate, as the voice of a fascist regime. Okay, so very interesting how that works. Now we come here to Justice and his decision to blow up Justice, to turn his mind instead to Anarchy, because Justice no longer serves the people, it serves only the powerful. Just as fate on McDonald's label was smiling, knowing that she had made an alliance with the powerful rather than the good. So we will end it here for now. Next, we will do this chapter. We'll finish this chapter and we'll move on to vision. I think we'll move more quickly through the book now that I've done a lot of that setup. But tell me if you like this style of video where we're very complexly going through little bits and pieces. I will definitely do one for Watchmen, which is, I think, even more... Ooh, these are beautiful. Wow, look at that. Is even more emblematic of our time, because we live in not a perfectly fascist moment. We live in a neoliberal moment where fascism is becoming a tool, right, of corporations. So it's not perfect, this book, in its representation of what we're going through right now, but I do find it a fascinating text about vigilantism, about chaos, about the manipulation of justice, and when a people wakes up and realizes that the rules of the past are gone, they have been taken by someone, they have been stolen, and we must get them back. Okay? So again, I don't think this was a restful video at all. I apologize. But maybe the sheer boredom of my droning on voice has put you to sleep. We can only hope. Well, good night, everyone. We shall return to V again soon.